Okay, so I can maybe already say, so welcome everyone to the session. I think it's institutional arrangements to facilitate access to housing. We switched the order a little bit. So Vaidhi is going to go first, then we have Sneha, and then we continue the way it is in the program. Everyone's going to have 20 minutes, and then we do Q&A. So because Vaidhi has to leave, I think we're really happy to have you, and let's just get started.
Yeah, I apologize in advance for not attending the rest of my own session, but because of some scheduling snafus, I ended up on a 5 p.m. flight today evening, and so I need to rush to the airport as soon as I'm done. So the loss is entirely mine, and I apologize in advance to my co-panelists. But I did see the presentations, and it looks like a fun set of papers, which I'd be happy to read on the flight back. So coming to the paper that I'm presenting, this is co-authored with Sahil Gandhi and Anupam Nanda at the University of Manchester, and with Nandan Agnihotri, who is at C7 India, which is a think tank. We are looking at the impact of a mandatory disclosure policy on housing markets in a major Indian city. The main motivation. Okay. Works. The main motivation for this is, of course, Akerlof's seminal work on the market for lemons, which hypothesized that because when there's a high level of information asymmetry between buyers and sellers in the market, markets don't function efficiently. You get market failure. And this is very much the case. So information asymmetry is prevalent and is severe in the context of developing countries. So you not only have land titling issues, but you also have developers not adhering to building codes and regulations. You have violations of building codes and regulations. There's lots of delays in finishing real estate projects on time. And all of this information is something that buyers don't know when they purchase a property in a real estate project, which is often under construction at the time of purchasing the property. At the same time, you also have a high incidence of legal disputes. So in the city of Mumbai, which is the city I'll be talking about in this presentation, we have nearly 30% of all upcoming projects that are under litigation in the city. There are lots of causes of litigation. So these could be driven by some of the underlying problems that I mentioned before, which is developers violating regulations or land titling disputes. But often it's also because of citizens groups, just not wanting development in certain parts of the city, either because of environmental considerations or because they want to preserve the way a certain neighborhood looks, which is like the classic NIMBY kind of a behavior. And these kinds of disputes come under a class of public interest litigation in India. Now, I'll caveat here by saying that we don't know the exact nature of litigation in the projects that we are studying. So we know which projects have litigation, we know when the litigation happened, we know the number of cases, but we can't say what exactly is happening. And therefore, it's difficult for us to so when we talk generally about policy implications for this and the net social welfare or loss from a mandatory disclosure reform, we are unable to kind of comment much on whether or not whether the reform is welfare enhancing, because we don't know the nature of underlying litigation. So I'll talk more about it when I discuss the last slides. But essentially what we do is we look at the introduction of a disclosure law on which mandated developers to disclose the litigation status of the real estate projects. And we look at what happened to house prices of litigated units and non-litigated units after the reform was introduced. We also look at we also test whether the impact of the disclosure law was heterogeneous across luxury and non-luxury projects and high and low income home buyers. So, of course, our paper contributes to the work on mandatory disclosure laws, which has a large body of literature, and there's been mixed evidence on whether or not mandatory disclosures always work. A large part of this has been, of this work, this empirical research has been done in the context of developed countries, and our paper looks at the context of a developing country and specifically housing markets in developing countries. We also contribute to new literature that is studying frictions in housing markets in developing countries and especially in India. So this is another contribution that this paper is interested in making. So the theoretical underpinnings are simple. So basically, we start with the hypothesis that before the disclosure law, it's hard for buyers to know whether or not a project is litigated. So a real estate project can or cannot have litigation. Buyers don't know this information, and therefore there's no difference. In identical projects, you would be paying the same amount of money for even if one of the projects was litigated. So what we hypothesize is that with the disclosure, now that the status of the litigated project becomes known, we see that units in litigated projects would sell at a discount and units in non-litigated projects would sell at a premium. And that would sort of lead to a separating equilibrium after the disclosure reform. We also hypothesize that the reform actually helped different groups differently. So without the reform, it's not as if buyers had no clue or no way to find out litigation status. Some buyers did have access to resources to find out whether or not the projects were litigated. This usually tends to be high-income buyers or buyers who are buying luxury projects because they have the resources and the wherewithal to find out the litigation status. On the other hand, we wouldn't see low-income buyers having the necessary resources to find out this information. And therefore, we hypothesize that there will be a heterogeneous impact of the reform across high and low-income groups and also across luxury and non-luxury projects. So coming to this specific reform that I'm going to be discussing, this was introduced in 2016 by the central government of India. And this is the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act, which was introduced to bring about transparency in the real estate sector. So there was an acknowledgement of the problems of information asymmetry. And under this law, all state governments had to constitute a real estate regulatory authority and set up a bunch of rules for real estate developers to follow. The Real Estate Regulatory Authority requires every new multi-family housing project in the state to register with the authority and provide a whole bunch of details, which are then made available on a publicly available RERA website. Okay, so every state has its own RERA website, but the kinds of details that are available on these websites differ. So in some states, so 7 states to be precise, we also know whether a project is under litigation, but we don't know that for the rest of the states. So the state of Maharashtra is one such state which mandated its all developers who are registering their projects to make the litigation status known on its public website. So we also have a whole bunch of other information about the project, such as their location, estimated completion dates, and so on and so forth. So if you were to go on the MahaRERA website, which is the Maharashtra government's RERA website, and type in the name of the project in which you're interested in buying a house, it would take you to this web page, which will very prominently display whether or not the project is under litigation. So if you were wondering whether or not people are easily able to find this information, if they are able to find this information. And also, RERA is a very well-known policy, so most buyers are aware of it. Developers have to advertise that their project is RERA registered and give a link to the project in all their advertising materials. So this is very easily searchable and can find the litigation status pretty easily. So what we did was we scraped the MahaRERA website and got a list of all 3,000 real estate projects that were ongoing in the city. So this only applies to all the new projects, not the ones that are already completed. So the new projects that have registered on the website, we get their details, we know the developers, we have details about the amenities that are being provided in that project, and we also know whether or not the project has litigation. Then we, from a separate data source, which is the mortgage data set that was provided to us by a large private bank in India, we get housing transaction data for Mumbai. So we know, therefore, for every loan that was made by the bank, we know the price at which the house was being purchased, and we also know the project that it belonged to. Because they give, because in the data set they include a uniquely identifiable RERA number, which the real estate authority assigns every project that's registered with its on its website. So using the RERA number, we were able to match 11,553 units from the mortgage data set to 972 projects from the RERA data set. And we then were able to just run a standard two-way fixed effects regression to estimate the impact of the reform. So essentially, our main dependent variable here is the log of the price of unit I in project J in year quarter T. And our main coefficient of interest is the interaction term litigation into post, which is litigation is a dummy that takes the value 1 if the project to which this unit belongs is under litigation, and post is all quarter periods after May 2017, which is when the policy became, which is when the policy was implemented. We include project fixed effects, and we also include year quarter fixed effects. We also include certain unit and buyer characteristics, such as the size of the unit, the gender of the buyer, the income of the buyer, and so on. So our baseline results show that the reform did lead to an impact in terms of a fall in prices of litigated units. So we see that after the reform, prices of litigated units fell by about 5% on average, compared to units in non-litigated projects. The next step was to understand whether there was any difference between luxury and non-luxury projects. Did the reform work differently for different types of projects? In order to do this, we take a list of amenities that again are available to us from the RERA website, and we classify every project as whether or not it's a luxury project based on these categories of amenities. So for instance, if a project has a swimming pool, a gymnasium, a jacuzzi, we are able to classify that project as a luxury, and if it doesn't have any of these, we classify it as a non-luxury project. And then we essentially run the same estimation for different samples of luxury, separately for the luxury and non-luxury subsamples. And here what we find is that for the non-luxury projects, we continue to see an impact. So the reform did lead to a fall in prices of litigated units in the non-luxury sample, but we fail to see an impact in the luxury subsample. And if I can draw your attention to the coefficient for litigation, we see that it's negative and significant, which tells us that in the pre-period, we already were seeing litigated projects as being lower, as having a lower price on average relative to units in non-litigated projects. So this tells us something about that maybe there are some ways in which buyers were already able to get information about litigation even without a mandatory disclosure policy, whereas in the non-luxury project is where we see the effect of the disclosure policy. Now we played around with the definitions of luxury and non-luxury by through various combinations of amenities, and we see that we continue to see this pattern where in non-luxury projects the reform has an impact, but not in luxury projects. The next thing we tested is for whether or not the reform had an impact for different income quartiles of home buyers. So in our data set, we know the incomes of the buyers, and we were able to create a distribution and then classified buyers into 4 income quartiles. Now the caveat here is, we've called the first income quartile the poorest, but it's not actually poor because remember, these are all people who are buying a house in Mumbai and are getting a loan from a private bank. So they're fairly well to do, but because they fall in the lowest income quartile, we decided to categorize these as the poorest income buyers. And here, if we look at the interaction, so we plot the coefficient of litigation to post into the income quartile, we see that the reform had an impact on the lowest income quartile, but we failed to see an impact on the highest income quartile, which again tells you something about the heterogeneous impact in which the heterogeneous impact of the reform on across different home buyers. So coming to the mechanisms, do I have enough time?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So coming to the mechanisms for to explain our results, to try and understand what exactly may be going on. So firstly, why are we observing in our baseline results a price decline of litigated units? We think this could potentially be because of two reasons. The first, we may see buyers bargaining with the developers to get a discount on the litigated projects. However, unfortunately, we don't have data to test for this because we could test for this, for instance, if we had an asking price and the final price, and we saw some difference between that could have indicated some kind of bargaining happening, but we don't have that data, unfortunately. What we can test is potentially a developer response, where once the litigation status is known, but developers can't sell their units because then buyers are preferring to either switch to a non-litigated project or not buy to the litigated project. So developers would see a fall in sales, and in order to get rid of the inventory, they would reduce prices in order to sell their stock of housing. We're able to test this because we know the share of sales for each project in every year quarter. So because we have this, we essentially test whether the sales of litigated units fell after the reform in order to get some suggestive evidence about developer response as driving the results that we see. So again, the dependent variable in this case is the percentage of sales of the total units that was sold in every year quarter for each project. And our, again, coefficient of interest is the litigation into post variable. And here we find that the sales of the projects did decline after the reform. So sales of litigated projects declined after the reform, which may be telling us something about developer response as being one mechanism that is driving the difference, driving our baseline results. The second results that we saw in terms of differential effects for luxury and non-luxury projects could be driven by two factors. One is the resource story that I mentioned, where high-income buyers have the means and the resources to investigate land titles, and low-income buyers don't. So what we find is that we have we have buyers of all income quartile groups buying into both luxury and non-luxury projects. So essentially, what we do to test this is just, again, for the luxury and non-luxury subsamples separately, see what's happening for the different income quartiles and see whether we are seeing the impact of the reform for all income quartiles. And what we find is that the lowest income quartiles is where we are seeing the impact of the reform on prices of litigated units, and not in the highest income quartile. So our story potentially has some legs, that it is household resources that is driving that's driving this result that we are seeing for the luxury and non-luxury luxury submarkets. The other mechanism that we thought of was media coverage. So most luxury projects with big ticket developers tend to, if they run into any kinds of troubles, tend to be covered by the media. So even without a disclosure policy, anybody who reads the papers would know about a luxury project getting into trouble. Smaller non-luxury projects often don't get that kind of media coverage. So in order to, again, test for this media coverage as a potential channel, we only looked at the sample of litigated projects in the pre-reform period. And then we essentially looked for media coverage for, so we searched for every project by name and looked on Google to see whether we find any media coverage about any issues that these projects are facing. We find that some projects, and by and large, luxury projects did have some coverage from, in the newspapers about legal issues. So we created a media dummy variable that took value 1 if there was any media coverage and 0 otherwise. And we just ran a vanilla regression where we regress the media dummy on the log price per square foot of litigated projects. However, we failed to find any evidence that it is media coverage that is driving these heterogeneous impacts across luxury and non-luxury projects. So while the household resources story potentially has some credibility, we don't see this in the case of the media dummy, so we can't really say whether this is driving the results or not. So coming to the policy implications, therefore, what if we take all of the results together, we know that there is, by and large, some positive impact of the reform in that it's resulting in a reduction in how inequality of information available to buyers across different groups. And it is potentially leading to some correction where prices of litigated units are falling relative to prices of non-litigated units. This again directly means that all the other states that don't ask buyers to ask developers to provide the litigation information on the RERA website, if they were to do so, we could potentially see some benefits to home buyers and some corrections in the markets. But on the other hand, we don't know what the long-term consequences of this are. We don't know whether litigation itself falls over time. And that's because we don't know the nature of litigation itself. So we need to be a bit more modest in terms of when we're thinking about the general benefits of the reform. We don't know whether or not it will be welfare increasing in general. But what we do find, of course, is the need, and we highlight again, is the need for cross-cutting reforms that reduce the incidence of litigation itself. And those would pertain to strengthening property rights and contract enforcement so that we can reduce the incidence of litigation and therefore, the entire unintended consequences of, developers bearing the cost of litigation that they can have no control over and therefore exiting. We can sort of mitigate that unintended consequence of a disclosure policy. So I'll conclude with that, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, given we're in a small room, yeah,
Yes.
let's manage yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you probably have done the procedure, and so it's a litigation before the reform,
Mhm.
find no effects at all. So another question I have is, because you use J as a fixed effect, so J is a project.
Yes.
So the project, so I'm wondering, is this a high-rising building?
Most on average, yeah, they are. They're not high rises, but they are multi-family. So in a city like Mumbai, you have a 4-story building is normally the minimum, and that's what that's the size of the project for it to register with the RERA.
Yeah, so if in the same building, so you're talking about new building.
Mm-hmm.
So in the same new building, how come some unit got disputed, others will not get litigation?
So some units were transacted before the.
So it is not really the new building. So
No, it's the new building, so they're still under construction. So we are looking at transactions between 2015 to 2020. So if a building came up in 2015, it still takes some time for it to complete. But in 2017, the litigation status was known. So we have some units in that same project which were sold before the litigation status got known, and some units which were sold after the litigation status got known.
yeah, so I just think about the cost of the litigation, why in the same building.
The litigation existed from, say, maybe in 2015 itself.
For the whole building.
Yeah, the litigation is for the project, not for a unit.
So some of them already sold,
Yes,
some of them sold later.
yes.
So the later part are affected by the policy, but not the. Yeah. I'm also thinking about spillover, maybe the next, which, yeah, it's the same building, yeah, okay. So this is the only.
We control for spillover, so we removed projects in the sample which were built by the same developers who had like litigated and non-litigated projects because we thought there could be developer spillover effects, and our coefficients go up by a little bit, but they're still significant. So,
Yeah,
but
it's okay, Chair.
Go ahead, go ahead.
I noticed from your results that due to this litigation, disclosure price went down by almost 5%. But for the luxury units, they also went down already earlier by about 10%.
Mhm.
Do you know why that was much higher? Do you have some information for that?
no,
Okay.
no. Short answer.
Okay. Yeah, but it might be interesting to find out.
Yes, we try to look for it, but yeah, it's a
Okay,
puzzle.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
But they didn't try to take it. Yeah, I'm just wondering, do you see any conversation or chain effect of this kind of policy? Seems like we play in the home market, but we expect to see that where you have like kind of this kind of information disclosure,
Mhm.
the drive some RC levels.
That's a good question. Maybe in the it could potentially be a longer run effect where you may see some developers sort of exiting the market. But yeah, we've not tested for this in this. But yeah, point taken. Yeah.
Do you have any data from like other sides of the border, like other states that don't have their disclosures?
Yeah, we'd love to do that. No, we don't have.
My question is like, is RERA disclosure itself an amenity? Like would that, like if somebody's deciding between Gujarat and Maharashtra, the fact that RERA exists, even if the place is under litigation, like there's the information kind of like support there that you wouldn't get across the border, so.
Yeah, we'd love to. We were looking at these kinds of border regressions to run, but we don't know. We don't have information on other states.
Two minor points.
Yeah.
One is, maybe you said this, I missed it, but we don't know the nature of the litigation, right?
Yeah.
So it seems to be a very strong position to say it's a signal of the quality. Developers and projects can get sued for many different reasons.
Yes. Agree, but we also say that the litigation is either a signal or it can turn the project into a lemon because of high judicial pendency rates in India. Once you have a legal dispute, it could take years for it to get resolved, and like basically the project is then stalled. So agree, but it's not all of it is a signal that of underlying quality issues.
Yeah, the other thing is you're looking at price, whether you have information on the time on the market. So you can run this parallel regression.
Yeah, we don't, unfortunately. We try to look for this information. But thank you for your suggestions.
You only have final price.
Yes.
Paid, but
Yeah.
not first when.
No, we don't have the advertised price for it, and we don't know the time on the market either. So those, yeah.
No,
No,
I was trying to think about long run adjustments, which I think you kind of mentioned in the end. So one thing I thought of is, are there any buildings that might be prevented from redeveloping, for example, after this policy went through, because developers wouldn't be picking that up anymore? If there's a building that's already litigated, knowing all of this, could you look at that?
Yeah.
And I guess then the other one is just, is there any reason to believe that litigation itself, so someone must be, I was trying to think about is there anyone that's losing out that's not the developer from not having their something sold in a building where they maybe own land or something like that? So is there any reason that litigation itself might react to this?
So there was, we got a comment that we got is, would this lead to an increase in in litigation itself, where buyers strategically litigate to get the to get a reduction fall, which unfortunately we can't test it in the data set, but it could potentially be one result of the reform, that's leading to an increase in the incidence of litigation. But beyond that, I'm not sure who else would be sort of acting strategically as a result.
Cool. I think we're at time.
Time to leave.
Yeah. Okay, yes, Neha, we're ready for you. I hope you can hear. Were you able to hear all the questions asked in the room as well? Perfect.
Yeah.
Then you also have 20 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A. And maybe do you want me to let you know, or someone to let you know when you have 5 minutes left?
I have a timer with me, so no
Okay.
worries.
Perfect. Okay, then the floor is yours.
Yeah, so the slides are visible.
Sorry, yes,
Yeah, the
visible,
slide.
yes.
Yeah, okay, I'll start then. Yeah, so hello everyone, good afternoon. It's already 11:30 here, midnight almost in India. I was supposed to be there, but unfortunately I couldn't present and I'm now presenting online. So currently I'm in Varanasi, India, and I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Architecture Planning. So my topic for today's discussion is the institutional analysis of urban land markets and the housing policy shift that we see in a metropolitan region. So let me take you to the national capital region, Delhi. So we studied about Mumbai, so now let's all fly to Delhi. Whenever I start this discussion, I always put forth this image which I had clicked in 2018, and it's a very drastic image to look at. Like we have these high-rise apartments coming up, under construction units coming up in the very proximity of the agricultural land, and it's a very pertinent phenomenon across the peripheries of Indian cities. So I would like to put forth a simple a simple equation, wherein I call it a housing dilemma that we are facing in India, wherein on one part we say that we have a housing shortage. The last when we had the census done in India, we jotted down at the housing shortage of around 18.73 million units, and there and on the other side we have this unsold inventory of around which will take around 46 months to be sold, like at the current pace of sales. So, in the very same market, we have this housing shortage for a particular income group, and we have this unsold inventory or an oversupply of housing, which is not being occupied by the people. So, when I investigated and I tried to understand, I realized that the core cause is probably the land development policies which are functioning within the market. So there were some research questions which I put forth while dwelling into this. And the first was, what was the cause for this huge demand and supply gap in the market? And why there was unutilization or underutilization of formal housing units at the peripheries of cities like Delhi. Secondly, how far do these different development models within a region, when they function within a region, they lead to this difference in the supply, in the housing supply? And finally, what is the role of different actors, say for example, the public actors as in the administration and the private players, which are functioning within this institution or within the setup of land development and housing supply in developing economies? So let me just briefly introduce to my case study region, which popularly is known as Delhi NCR, and it comprises of 4 different states of India. And as you know, in India we have a federal system, and the land and urban development falls in the concurrent list of our constitution, which says that land and urban development is to be carried out by the state itself. The central government will formulate certain guidelines, but state governments have the ultimate say how they want to put forth the land and urban development. So if you can see the profile or the development that has occurred in Delhi over a period of time, we see that most of the construction or the built up that is coming up is in the urban center, that is in Delhi, and along the development corridors, along the main highways, we see this kind of a ribbon development that is going on, especially being pulled towards the eastern part of the city, that is towards the Uttar Pradesh part or the Uttar Pradesh sub-region, and towards the southern, that is the south of Haryana, or popularly known as the Gurgaon and Faridabad regions within NCR. So for this study, I limited myself with the 3 states only. I tried to understand the dynamics of the market in Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and Delhi being the center. So to understand the development markets or the land development markets, I try to first understand how the urban population is placed as per our government records or as per our government data. So there I found that there is a little bit of discrepancy when we try to understand what an urban agglomeration is. So I try to redefine urban agglomeration based on the contiguous urban fabric or contiguous built-up that we see from the satellite images. I got this data from the global human settlement layer, and I superimpose that data onto the existing urban boundaries or the urban areas that have been given by the central government. And then I saw that the urban area that has been defined by the government, the actual built up goes way beyond. So we need to redefine the amount of population or the amount of urban that we call within this region. So I found out that 71.2% of the total urban population that resides in this redefined urban agglomeration. So there is a lot of concentration of population that is happening towards the urban center. So then I tried to understand what are the policy frameworks that are currently in practice in the entire region. And there, the first understanding was that we do have different level of policy documents or policy guidelines at different levels. Say, for example, at the national level, then for the region, we have certain documents, the regional plan, we have the functional plans. Then at the state level, at the provincial level, we do have certain master plans or building bylaws, land use documents. And then subsequently, we have the zonal plans which define how the city planning will happen. And finally, at the project level, individual site layouts are developed or the project layouts are developed. But then once I tried to again subcategorize it, I found that Delhi particularly, or the National Capital Territory of Delhi particularly, is governed by both like the entire region is governed by both the national and state institutions, but Delhi particularly has been under the control of the urban government, because Delhi, being the national capital territory, it has a special status, and it has its own it has a special status, and its own governance is done at the union level by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. And there is a different body or a regional body which approves all these plans, that is called the National Capital Region Planning Board, which is the governing or which is a nodal agency. So then I try to understand the institutional network in this region, so as to further like understand or to validate my hypothesis that actually Delhi is being governed by the union government, and the other two states, there is a difference in the policy setup or in the institutional setup of these states. So when I plotted all the how the different networks are functioning, or how the governments and different institutions are functioning within this entire region, I found out that the urban and land development legislation powers, they are vested in the state governments, because as I said that it's a federal system, but Delhi, it's more skewed towards the union government because of the special status. And the Delhi Development Authority that operates, the development authority that operates in New Delhi, it draws its powers from the central government, whereas that is not the case in the other two states, but collectively they are a part of a larger region. I would want you to please remember this slide, because it has a major impact on the coming findings that we have in the discussion. So again, I try to understand how the policy has shifted over a period of time since the independence, and I again plotted these policy shifts on different levels, at the national level, at the state level, and regional level. And when I try to understand the policy framework or the changes in the vision documents or in the policy statements, I found that after the economic reforms of 1990, we had a major shift from a socialist approach of governance towards a more market-driven approach. So the policies, they were more towards understanding the role of a private player within the market of urban development, and same could be seen for the real estate development, for the housing development, as well as for the land policies. So post 1990, we can, or post 2000, we can see there is a major shift in the policy framework wherein we could see policies like land acquisition and rehabilitation settlement, which came in 2013, which became a major milestone in terms of land development in India. Similarly, the policy in 2016, which the previous uh, discussion we had about the Real Estate Regulatory Act and the Real Estate Investment Trust that was formed in 2016, which again was towards understanding the private players, how they are functioning within the market. Similarly, at the regional level or at the state level, we had a policy called Daily Land Pooling Policy, which came up in 2010 and it got formalized in 2013, which gave a new kind of a development impetus to this region, to this area. So similarly, we see this contrast or this shift happening at the policy level as well, and we'll try to understand how this has impacted the overall housing market within the region because of this policy shift. So this was a background of the National Capital Region of Delhi, so as you could understand how exactly the policies are functioning. So now coming down to institution analysis. So when we talk about institution analysis from the literature, we understand for doing any institutional analysis, we need to understand first the actors or the agents who are functioning within that institution, and they have a certain set of roles and responsibilities or relationship among the stakeholders, which needs to be validated. So taking this as a background, from the literature, I try to understand which all are the actors which are functioning within the market of land and housing. So I categorized the actors into two segments. One was the primary decision-making actors. The ones, for example, the landowners, the private developers, the consumers or the buyers, and the renters. And then there were these secondary decision-making actors, which are the development authorities, maybe the investors or the financial institutions, which the primary decision actors are the ones wherein the property changes its hands, the property gets sold and bought by the entities, whereas the secondary decision making actors are the ones for facilitating these property changes or these exchanges. And I tried to put it in a analytical framework that how the development process actually happens. So then from the literature, I could understand there are different phases of land development. So from the rural land, when it gets notified through a master plan document or through any policy document, it gets converted into an urban land. Then the services are laid down. We have the road networks with the water supply and all those things, which we call it a serviced urban land. The infrastructure is established, and further the land gets developed, the buildings get erected, and overlapping these phases of development on how the policy has functioned, like whether it's a more controlled approach wherein the master plan document is like controlling all the development, or it's a market driven system wherein the market itself functions the way it wants. So whether the actors are more inclined towards the public sector or they are more inclined towards the private sector. So keeping all this in mind and understanding all these sub-markets which are there, as you can see, there were three major sub-markets, the NCT Delhi, the Uttar Pradesh and the Haryana, and then subsequently there are these sub-markets when you go out there in the real estate market. They ask us like where you want to invest or what are the sub-markets that are most pertinent in these regions. So I classified all these markets and sub-markets based on the analytical framework, and then I got these three development models. One was state-oriented model, another was the market-oriented model, and the third one was mixed model. I'll explain these models in the upcoming slides. And when I put all these development models on the analytical framework that we discussed previously, we see that the market-oriented model is more towards the private sector, as the name suggests, and the approach for master planning or the policy framework is more towards market-determined approaches. And then we have this mixed model wherein it overlaps between it overlaps between the public and private sector elements or actors in development, but it's more towards a controlled approach. Whereas the state-oriented model, it is totally controlled approach of planning, and it's totally driven by the state actors. But I hypothesize that we need to establish a balance between all the different vertical and the horizontal axes that we have, all the different approaches of development. We need to find a balance. And how do we find the balance? How do we reach here? That was the whole idea. So let me explain these models one by one. So based on the phases of development that we discussed first, how the property exchanged its hands in state-oriented model is that there was a lot of bulk land acquisition that happened in Delhi in 1970s or early 1980s, wherein when the first master plan of Delhi was proposed. So what happened? The development authorities themselves purchased land in bulk, and then they started developing on their own. So here the developer itself becomes a primary decision making actor. The development authority becomes a primary decision making actor, and then these properties get sold out in the market through the buyers or through the renters. But now recently, with the change in the policy shift that I talked about, the upcoming Delhi land pooling policy and the Real Estate Regulatory Act, we can see there is a redevelop, and also there is a redevelopment policy in Delhi. We see that as a shift. So now Delhi market is entering into a phase 4 dash, wherein we can see these private developers entering into the market, but through redevelopment projects. They cannot actually buy the land. So there is a limit, or there is a restriction in terms of land purchases done by the private developers. So the outcome of such a model is that, as you can see in the image alongside, there is this Dwarka sub-city, which is in the southwest part of the Delhi, and we can see these unauthorized colonies coming in the vicinity of the sub-city. So where the land acquisition has been done in bulk, we see a planned city, and because of the aspiration or because of the investment driven approach by the people, they see this potential and they start acquiring land in unauthorized colonies. So there is this very like a disparity, or in terms of the urban fabric, or in terms of the urban growth that we see in cities through this model. So then I actually went and did some case studies, and I found that since it is all controlled by market, all controlled by the public sector, the acquisition happens in bulk, the delivery happens through lottery system, or it is a very slow pace of development. And the private developers also who are coming up through these redevelopment projects nowadays, they are facing issues like the cost of the prices, the cost of the land is so high that they only can afford to deliver in luxury segments. There is no other option for them. Similarly, in the market-oriented model, we can see the land ownership or the land exchange happens directly between the private developer and the landowner between phase 1 and phase 2. But there, the development authority becomes the silent spectator in this whole development process, and the private developers, they go to the landowners and they ask for the price, and then we see that these kind of piecemeal developments or very haphazard kind of developments are happening. The plots that are carved out of the rural land, they are in a very haphazard shape and size, because maybe the landowner doesn't want to sell, then the private owner doesn't have any option, and they just acquire and then consolidate land as per the availability, and then they start the construction. So all these fragmented developments happen in the city in this market oriented model. And we see all these problems in the market, as in there is lack of connectivity to these projects, because wherever the developer gets the option or they negotiate the prices, they just start the development without any infrastructure being in place. So we see these scattered developments, and there are no actual, most of the people who are investing in these projects are the investors rather than the actual like people who need the housing. So these are more investment driven projects. And again, I could do some case studies for this model, and I saw that there is very less occupancy in such projects because these are very far away from the city. They look very good in terms of the kind of development that they are doing, but they lack the basic infrastructure, the basic residential environment that has to be there within the city. And the occupancies are very low as like 5% in some of the ultra luxury projects. So the most of the investments are happening based on speculation. And the third market is a mixed market, wherein the acquisition happens in bulk by the development authority. Then the licenses for development are granted to the private developers. So what happens then? we have these regular plots which are being cut by the development authority, and the lease or the license for development is given to the private developers based on the bid, how much they are giving to the development authority. So once the bulk acquisition happens, the road networks are laid down by the development authority, and then these housing units come up. Although I wouldn't say this is the best option, but somewhat it falls within the what the literature says in terms of development at different phases of development. And again, when I saw some case studies of this model, I could realize that it all depends on the private developer, how they are approaching or how they are selling ultimately, or how their marketing strategy is happening within the market. So there were two very classic projects which are there in Noida, wherein one project has over 90% occupancy. Both the projects started at the same time, and the other project was has an occupancy of less than 10%. Reason being, the developer in the number 9 case study, JP Wishtown, they delivered units, or they delivered units in bulk into the market. Around 36,000 units were planned and delivered in the market. So there was huge housing supply all of a sudden in the market, and there were no buyers as such. So it all depends on the marketing strategy or the feasibility by the developer at the end. So these were the geographical locations of all these case studies and the segments. So I tried to cover all the segments which are available in the market, from luxury, ultra luxury to mid segment, affordable segment, and try to understand how the market is behaving, or how the policies have, all the housing has been functioning. And then I try to understand in terms of risk for the private developer or the development authority that is there. So across all the three markets, we can see the market-oriented development, or the market-oriented model is always at risk in terms of the externalities, as well as the economic risks that are attached to it, and the internal risk. Whereas in the mixed model, we see the most of the risk is averted in the earlier stages of construction, but during the construction and the implementation stage, there are little risks which can be averted based on the marketing strategy, as I was already saying. So the answers to these questions that I had put forth is, what is the cause of this demand and supply gap? So it is all, as we could see, that it is the land procurement and delivery mechanism that the development authorities are adapting or adopting in terms of the land, how the land functions within the market. As we can see in the case of Delhi or the NCT or the state-oriented model, although it seems very good, but the pace of development becomes very slow, because the development authority itself has to actually acquire the land as well as deliver the projects. So there is a huge gap between the actual demand in the market and the supply that happens. And in Gurgaon, it's a total contrast, or in the market-driven model, it's a total contrast. There is an oversupply. Similarly, within the region, what happens is that even if there is a policy that Delhi Development Authority wants to come up with, or the Delhi market wants to bring in a policy, but there are these latent external factors, or pull or push factors, which are happening because of the nearness within the city. So that Noida market, policies of Noida market will impact the policies of Delhi market, as well as the policies of Gurgaon market will impact the policies of Delhi market. So these interconnections within the region, they need to be addressed at the regional level, rather than looking at these markets in isolation. So the policy has to be a holistic policy for the region, rather than having a land development policy for individual states or individual markets. And similarly, the role of actors and for the development that we see, both the state and market actors are very much important, because we see that for delivery of the project, the state mechanism as well as the market-driven mechanism, they have their own place of importance, and there is private investors, or the private sector is much needed for investments within the market, because the development authorities sometimes they don't have the amount of money or the resources to invest in land. And as per the stage of development that we can see, as the construction construction happens, the phase of construction happens, there has to be a balance that needs to be achieved in order to incentivize both the markets as well as state. So my closing statement for this is that much of the discussion in the academia and in the policy arena has been happening towards the low income segments of housing. We always talk about slum redevelopment, slum upgradation, but most of the discussions they stop there. And we need to understand bulk of the population in the housing demand is driven from the middle income segment. So we need to understand for the middle income segment where the policies are standing and the current policies, how the housing is being delivered in the market. Ultimately, if the middle segment group is addressed, we will see some trickle down effect on the lower segments. And lastly, this is my final slide. Now I'm trying to understand these institutional functions or these setups within the smaller cities of India, where the informalities are much higher and the skewness in the market is even um, very much what I can say, like there are a lot of informalities and there are no proper development institutions or no proper legal setups or authorities which govern the housing outcomes, and thus we can see that there is this performance or that there is an overall impact that we can see from the land models onto the housing outcomes and the overall urban fabric within the city. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot. We have 4 minutes for questions. Maybe whoever asks can quickly introduce or say who they are as well. Questions? I have a question. So I'm Amrita. I was wondering if, so it's tremendous amount of work that you've done really disentangling what's going on with these different, in these different kinds of models. I was wondering if how you see the role of sort of further centralization or decentralization in that region. So would any of this help? Would any of the problem or the mismatch in demand supply, as you call it, be helped by any further centralization to some extent, or some further integration of the institutions?
See, the centralization of the institutions happened way in late 1980s when the National Capital Region Planning Board was set up. So that was the whole idea of to bring all these different sub-regions into a much larger umbrella and to control. But what we see is that whenever we talk about regional planning or we talk about regional policies, we tend to exclude housing or we tend to exclude land development. Most of the times we talk about industries, we talk about economics of the region, we talk about like how the connectivity of the region is happening. But most of the regional policies or the regional planning that happens, we say that housing is market will take care of it. But actually, within the region, when different sub-regions are playing, when these push and pull of the policies is happening, it overall impacts the region. So what I believe is that at the regional planning level, we need to have certain land development policies also. Once the city has grown beyond its administrative boundaries, we need to have, in a federal system, we need to have an institution which can address to these land issues and housing issues.
Thanks. Other questions? Okay. Okay, then I think we'll move to the next topic. That will be you, Nico. I'm trying to figure out how to. Did you have the PowerPoint? No, you had a.
Yeah.
You know, yes, reconnect things. Okay, good. Yeah.
So let me read.
Oh.
This is not mine.
Oh, this is not, I'm sorry.
Okay. I want to use the laptop also because I have, well, I don't know somebody made it.
Oh, I see. This is yours, right?
Let me see. That's it, yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks. One small question, because there's no water or anything else in this room. You just want to get some water, something to drink, because I'm talking a lot. Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah. Thank you. Well, my presentation will be slightly different from some of the others. Can you also look at the screen? Sure. No, I was not. Don't need to watch the screen over there. So slightly different from the previous two presentations. It doesn't focus so much on urban housing issues, but more cultivated land in China. In fact, it's a paper which was prepared mainly by the first author, Yang Tang, who's a PhD researcher with us in Wageningen. I hope to do the thesis by the end of this year. But he couldn't make it to this conference, so he asked me to do this presentation on behalf of him and also the other authors. Chef Perix, who was also one of the supervisors, was in Wageningen, Ma Xianlei in Nanjing, who's also one of the supervisors. I was happy to accept his invitation because I retired from working 2 years ago, so I could make it partly work, partly also holidays as well. So as most of you attended sessions on China or who are familiar with China know, China is quite crucial. When you talk about land issues, you should make a distinction between urban land and rural land. Urban land is owned by the state. The state can lease it to businesses or individuals for housing purposes, for example. Whereas rural land is owned by the rural collectives. So it's mainly the rural villages, the village leaders who decide on what to do with the land that they assign land, based on equality principles to the households living in that village. And of course, that raises a question: well, what happens during urban expansion? Because rural land normally become less, urban land will become more. So what is going on then when urban expansion takes place? Yes, so it requires expropriation of rural land by the state or by local governments in the cities. And generally the conversations that are paid to these village collectives or the households who have use rights to lands, they tend to be quite low. There are some laws regulating these conversations, but most of the times the people receiving these conversations are not happy. After that, the urban government can lease the land to real estate companies. That's taking place quite a lot. There we saw some pictures in previous activities of leases going on to so these real estate companies are willing to pay quite high prices because they can make huge profits out of it. Great. I should have taken it myself. So they can sell it or lease it, in fact, for 30, 50, 70 years, I think. But at much higher prices. On the other hand, they can also lease it to industrial enterprises. This is more a way of attracting the prices tend to be much lower because industrial enterprises have lots of choices where they go to, and urban governments. The policy makers, the economic growth that they achieve in their city is also one criterion for being promoted. So they have a huge interest in attracting into industries to their cities. So they offer the land at relatively low prices to the industrial sector. But of course, once industries come in, they can be taxed afterwards. So that's another main source of income. So the governments make income from this price difference, from the residential sector, and from these tax revenues from the industrial sector. That in fact started to become quite an important source of government revenue. There were some policies going on that local governments they obtained less and less money from the central government. They had to search for other sources of income. This became quite an important source of income for the local governments. So in the Chinese country, that's called. So I think it's all recorded. I think it was over already. Sorry. Yeah, so that's quite an important source of income for governments. So the cultivated land taken out of cultivation, mainly for urban construction, was a major contributing factor also to cultivated land decline since the 1990s. Let's see, and you can see that in this table. It's some data that we collected over time from official sources, showing in different periods the land taken into cultivation. So it's not only land being taken out of cultivation, also land is being taken into cultivation by wastelands, sometimes even abandoned rural residential land. So on average, that was in the periods from 89 to 2021, 0.41 million hectares per year land taken into cultivation. But out of cultivation was higher. Was during the entire period was 0.67 million per year on average. So that gives, on balance, a decline per year of 0.26 million hectares over this entire period. What's interesting to see, and what's often not realized, people do research on China, always this urban expansion is blamed for it. This period, 2000 to 2008, was mainly ecological restoration, which was the main source of the decline in the cultivated land area. And they were huge programs, sloped land conversion program, which tried to take sloped land out of cultivation because there were, at the end of the 1990s, there were some huge problems with flooding, especially the Yangtze flooding. Killed quite some people, and also there were problems with dust flowing, especially through northern China. So there were big programs for shelter forests in northern China and so on. So quite a lot of land was taken out of cultivation during that period. But still, all over during the entire period, was about 0.22, and that's relatively constant all over the entire period. So it remains an important source of the decline in cultivated land area. This is another graph prepared by Liang Tan. In fact, we'll tell them that they should start from 0 in place of 0.1, but still, yeah, because then that looks a bit more realistic in my view. What you see is that the total expropriated land area increased over time up until 2010 and 2011. And it's not only cultivated land, it's also other land which is being expropriated, like I explained already. But the expropriated cultivated land more or less increased in line with the decline after that. I will explain that in slightly more detail later. So what does it mean for cultivated land area, this urban expansion? So maintaining sufficient cultivated land is quite a high priority in policymaking in China. Because there are 1.3 billion people living in China, China doesn't want to depend too much on imports from other countries, because that would create quite some sensitive issues. So that's why it's seen as a crucial issue for what is called food security, but food security at a macro level. And China wants to be around 95% or even more self-sufficient in grain production. So an area of 120 million hectares was set in 2006 as sort of a red line. It should not become less than that. And estimates have differed over time for how much land is available, because different surveys get different results. But the most recent surveys are quite more optimistic. We say, well, the current amount of available land is slightly more than 127 million hectares, which is still available. Since the end of the 1990s, China also adopted a policy that if land is taken out of cultivation somewhere else, it should be taken into cultivation, and a balance should try to be maintained. At the provincial level, you understand it well. So that's a policy that aims at achieving a balance in the supply of cultivated land. But one disadvantage of this policy is that often the land taken out of cultivation is very close to the urban areas. It tends to be high quality land. Farmers often invested quite a lot in it because they can get relatively high prices in this land for their outputs. So normally, that's what you see in many countries, that land very close to the big cities is relatively fertile, relatively good quality land. And that's the land that's taken out of cultivation. And the land that's taken into cultivation is often wasteland, perhaps abandoned residential land, and so on. So the quality is much lower. So, yeah, if we can get a bit of insight into what drives the cultivated land declines and perhaps also the quality of it, that can provide quite some relevant information for policy making. So that brings me to the objective of our paper is that to investigate the impact of agglomeration, so the industrial agglomeration, population agglomeration, and also the local government deficits on the expropriation of cultivated land in China. That's the main objective. This is a theoretical framework that we have developed, and only for the agglomeration forces. You see that industrial agglomeration, of course, leads to demand for more industrial land, but not only for that, of course. There are also people need to work in this sector. So there's also demand for housing, for apartments, other types of housing, and of course also for shops, cinemas, whatever. So there's also demand for commercial land as well. And of course, when there's more population coming into a city, that also creates demand for residential land. So together, these three forces, they still stimulate the acquisition and transfer of cultivated land by local governments. And that results in more industrial plants, more business centers, also public areas, green areas, and real estates. But that's the basic idea behind this approach. He downloaded a few pictures from the internet. I noticed it's an image by Baidu. Chinese will know that. It illustrates how this sometimes is done. So in Chongqing, so it's a big city in center-west China. So this is not cultivated land. This is rural land, but partly it was abandoned already. Still, first there was a subway line created, and that also leads to makes it more attractive. So first the government invests partly in that. That makes it more attractive for real estate developers to come into the area. I noticed also that quite often also campuses from industries are also first located in these areas, also to make it more attractive. And there may be other forces that I'm not aware of, so some of you, of course, can also illustrate it. And then you see step by step this area is developed more and more. He didn't, I don't know what's that source. I don't think he made this picture himself, if you can translate it. But it's in Ningbo, it's a major port city in eastern China.
China voice.
Okay, China voice. So he didn't make the picture himself. So this is already a subway entrance or exit. It's already established. There's still all cultivated land around it, but within 5 to 10 years it will look totally different, of course. Okay, so what kind of analysis do you think he can do? He developed a model saying, well, the dependence variable is the expropriated cultivated land area divided by the total construction land area for different provinces and for different years. And he also included some lags in it. I will motivate it later. So it's a fixed effect model with with province fixed effects, year fixed effects. And the C, the core explanatory variables, I was explaining it from industrial agglomeration, measurement in the industrial value added, population agglomeration, urban density, and the fiscal deficit rate. So the ratio of the government fiscal deficit to the total public revenue. So that's what the main focus is. And then he added some control variables to it, also assumed to have some independent effects as well. So this, so GDP per capita is not only assumed to affect industrial agglomeration, population agglomeration, but to have some independent effects as well. GDP growth rate, it's meant to indicate the vitality of the urban area in the province. The GDP growth goal, so that's normally set at the beginning of a year. So it's assumed that when the growth goals are high, there's also more pressure to expand, to attract more industries, more population, and so on. And then also the green space area is also included as a control variable. Data were taken from official statistics, the Ministry of Land and Resources, the Ministry of Housing, Urban and Rural Development, and the National Bureau of Statistics in China. Annual data for the years 2006 to 2021 for 29 provinces. So in mainland China. So Hong Kong, for example, is not included because it's not included in mainland China. But also Tibet and Shanghai, there were not sufficient data available for those two provincial units, so they're also not included. So the estimation method, like I said already, is fixed effect estimated with year fixed effects, and also with two lag specifications. We used either a lag of 1 year or 2 years. So the basic idea there is that it takes time to realize this land expropriation. It's not something that you do from today to tomorrow. So that's why we included some lags. It's not clear how long these lags will be. So we just played around with lags of 1 and 2 years and just trying to find out what might be the 1 to the 1. All the variables which are not measured as ratios, as percentages, they were also the natural logarithms were taken so that the problem of heteroscedasticity would be less. So that was all used for estimating this basic model, what I just showed. Then we also did some alternative analysis. So one with a different industrial agglomeration index. So the so-called location entropy index for the secondary sector, which is sometimes used in similar studies. Then we also looked at the dependent variables, so only looking at cultivated land expropriation for residential purposes, because that's also reported. This was reported until 2018 in the statistics for what purpose was the land being expropriated by the government. And that's also to look in more detail at the impact of population agglomeration. Also, of course, because normally industrial land takes relatively much in the industries expansion. They take relatively more land than all these high-rise buildings. So there might be differences between the total cultivated land expropriation and only for residential purposes. And finally, I looked at differences until and after 2013. The reason for that is that in 2013 there was the Central Committee of the Communist Party made a decision on deepening reforms. Since then, it was also possible to use land that was saved, rural residential land being saved, to use that also for urban expansion. There were some trading mechanisms introduced. So that also reduced the pressure on expanding in the pure urban areas. Okay, baseline regression results. We can go very quickly to this, so you see that only the industrial value added had a significant positive effect as expected for a 1 year time lag. For a 2 years time lag, it was just not significant. That's why I gave it an orange color. All the other factors were not significant except for some control variables. Using this location entropy index, they again significant for a 1 year time lag. Now also for a 2 years time lag, it becomes significant. But still the other two core variables, no significant effects. Oh. Okay, and this land expropriation for residential purposes. So now that's the dependent variable. Now you see not only the industrial value added played a significant role, but also the urban population density. Indeed, what you would expect that that has a positive impact next to industrial value added. So when more industries come on and they need more people and more houses, but also when more people come in prepared for existing jobs or whatever, it also leads to higher demand for cultivated lands. Still, this fiscal deficit rate with no significant impact. But like I said already, there was the Central Committee decision in 2013. So he divided the data set into two periods, before 2014 and from 2014 onwards. And then he found indeed that the fiscal deficit rate for the period 2006 to 2013 didn't have a positive effect. So apparently the fact that this decision was implemented indeed reduced quite a lot of the pressure of this land finance. So in conclusion, the main findings they provide support for the hypothesis that industrial agglomeration is positively related to the expropriation of cultivated land. Population agglomeration is positively related to the expropriation of cultivated land for residential purposes. That's what we found. And that these fiscal deficits of the local government are positively affected cultivated land expropriation before 2014, but after 2014, apparently this impact more or less disappeared. So very briefly, some relatively general policy implications. Industrial agglomeration, to a lesser extent population agglomeration, they remain a potential threat to China's food security by reducing the available cultivated land area. This 2013 decision of the Central Committee deepening reforms has significantly reduced China's land finance problem. As far as I know, it's quite a new finding. I didn't see any studies on that before, but I might be mistaken. And of course, this is we only have statistics on the quantity of land. We don't have statistics on the quality of land. Of course, that might still be an important issue. You should not only look at the quantity of land, but also at the quality of the cultivated land as well. So that's certainly be an important issue for future research. So that's my presentation. Thank you for attending. And that's, so if you have any questions, you're quite welcome. This is a picture I took a few years ago in Gansu province. I think, but it was not yet settled at that time. But perhaps the county seat, perhaps some years in the future, might want to expand, but at that time, not yet. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, maybe you have this in the paper, but there's an institutional context. There's a land quota system. So the central government will allocate land quota to allow each province in each year to convert rural land to urban land. So all of these is happening within that context.
Yeah.
So I guess we want to be careful. We don't want to say, okay, agglomeration and population is all like market forces are driven this. The central planners are allow you to do this. You could say the planners are paying attention to these market forces, but that's fine. But I think we should not omit that land quota system, that context. And the question will be that in a fixed effect model, you have year fixed effect. I just wonder whether you have tried, province fixed effect. Within variation will be, I guess, more convincing within the same province in years when you have a lot of industrial activities, then you converted a lot of rural land to urban usage. Because I worry about the reverse causality thing. You converted a lot of land, and of course that is used for industry, and of course you have a higher GDP. Yeah. It's an interesting stuff.
Yeah, okay, thanks, yeah. Shall I answer now, or you want to add something?
No, I suppose.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so on the land quota, you're quite right, of course, that the central government assigns land quota to the different provinces. But there might also be pressures, of course, local provinces might, of course, also try to get higher quota, I guess. So it might be also, to some extent, also a matter of demand and supply. I'm not fully sure about that. You probably know that much better than I do. These data, I should check it, but according to me, I think also there are data also on illegal land conversions as well. And I should check whether they're part of this data set. I thought so, but I'm not fully sure about that. So it's not only what was assigned, I guess, but I should check again by the other time. One other of my PhD students in the past did research on these illegal land conversions. So I know that there are data available. So all these conversions done by local governments, which were not formally approved, but still they did do so. And so they might be part of this data set, but we should surely check that and also mention some of these institutional issues that you mentioned. Yeah, that's quite right. Your province fixed effects, do you mean that we could multiply the time and the province effect, because there are time fixed effects and province fixed effect in this model?
You already have?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought on the slides I only see.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, then forget it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this institution also varies across regions. So, like it's a coastal area, so it allows to develop a lot more. And then the northeastern China, Heilongjiang, large land area, but also the main food supply of region.
Yeah.
So I think maybe it's more homogeneous.
Okay. I didn't really realize that, but it might be quite good to take that into account indeed. Yes, that's it.
Also
and the central China plain, the North China plain as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's typically divided by these 3 or 4 regions.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. That's a good idea to.
Also, the agricultural productivity, and it's very good for farms. Like Heilongjiang. I'm not sure whether sometimes the yield or sometimes the value. Because some certain area also just the typical, the different type of quality. Like northeastern, they produce special rice, very high quality. So related to the institution, I think also. We will present soon about the land policy allow people to purchase the product from another place, whether all this timing. I think that may.
It's quite interesting nowadays indeed. It's so.
I have a few questions.
A few.
So,
we have 1 minute.
So the model, the empirical modeling at the provincial level, I'm thinking the cities within the province, the size of cities vary a lot. So, do you also consider to do the empirical strategy at the city, use the city level data?
So to what extent these data are available, and I know that's
I think it's real. I think it's real.
it's available. Okay.
Yeah, this is the
But,
first.
but he needs to finish his thesis by the end.
He can graduate.
The next PhD.
Yeah. So, yeah, yesterday I also listened to Professor Jin Jiang's presentation. It's there's some connection between these two papers. So yesterday he talked about the county converted to the district, whether it impacted the land price. But one of the mechanism is to attract the new firms income. So I think maybe the motivation for the government to want to transform the cultivated land into the construction use or the urban land use, maybe the one reason or one mechanism is to attract new industries or firms. So maybe you can consider the number of firms inverting in the according cities or provinces. So maybe you can do some mechanism analysis. Yeah, let me see. So for the modeling, you use the fixed effects model. But I think for your goal independent variable, the land, the industry value added. So I think the dependent variable and the independent variable, they are interplaying. Maybe the structure in equation modeling can explain better for the interplaying between these two variables. So yeah, probably you can consider using new empirical techniques.
Yeah, I fully agree that because now he lacks, he says in industrial value added has an impact on cultivated land, the decline 1 or 2 years later. But you may indeed wonder whether that's actually the case, because once more land becomes available, of course, it's also a way to attract new enterprises as well. So that's indeed one big disadvantage of this whole approach, I would say. It's, but you think it can be solved with structural equation modeling?
Yeah, it can, but I think once the urban is growing, it also attracts the new industries. So probably if you use the structural equation model, you can also
you should surely have a closer look at that.
Yeah.
I fully agree with that.
Okay, you will think about that. I also think it might be worth thinking about adding productivity, agricultural productivity, because you motivate from the food insecurity point, and so maybe you want to look at net productivity or something like that as well. So what's the productivity, which was already mentioned, the yields? I think that would be really
That's a good idea.
Okay, yeah,
Okay, thanks.
It really doesn't make it easy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me in this session. I'm Yameng, third-year econ PhD student from the University of Hong Kong, and I'm very happy to present my ongoing research project titled Farmland Regulation, Structural Change, and Agricultural Development, Evidence from Chongqing and Home Reform. It is still an ongoing project and is at its early stage, so any comments and suggestions are highly appreciated. So the recent Russia-Ukrainian war has received great attention, and partly because of the surging food price, people feel there will be a global food crisis. And China has been concerned of food security for many years, and the Chinese government has implemented strict policies to reserve farmland and sustain grain outputs. However, those policies are typically top-down, and which may harm farmers' incentive and fail to foster agricultural development. Examples such as Farmland red land policy and green production project. At the same time, if we have a strict land use policy, it could slow down the urbanization and the structural change. So you may wonder, will a market-based approach be a silver lining? A market-based approach which may preserve farmland and promote structural change simultaneously, and also benefit farmers in the remote rural areas. So let me introduce you the land use conflicts in China. In China, preserve farmland is a national policy, which is called the Farmland Red Land Policy. It aims to preserve at least 1 billion of farmland nationwide, which is around 12% of the land space in China. And 1 unit of unused land is needed to convert it to farmland if 1 unit of farmland converted to urban land within the prefecture. So each region needs to maintain the certain amount of farmland. And the amount of urban land that can be developed is subject to the urban land construction quota. And it is also a top-down regulation. So the central government will decide the total amount of quotas that can be developed each year, and the central government will allocate to each province, and then province allocate to each city and city to counties. And the literature, including Professor Zhang's work, has found that the quota is skewed to the west and central regions, which is inconsistent with economic development and also the migration patterns. And there's no market to trade quotas before 2018. Now after 2018, there is a national platform that can allow regions to trade quotas. And during the same period, China has witnessed massive migration, especially from the rural areas to the city center. And those migrants will leave abundant rural residential land wasted because they are not allowed to sell it. So in this paper, I study market-based land reform in China, which is called the Chongqing land coupon system. The system will allow farmers and firms to trade land coupons, and the coupon is created when farmers reclaim their rural housing or their rural residential land into farmland. And in this way, the system will generate more farmland, and it will essentially create urban construction quotas. So before the reform, there is only one way to have the urban construction quota, that is assigned by the central government. But now, after the reform, Chongqing has found a new way to generate extra urban construction quota. So that's the policy innovation. And I want to evaluate how the land coupon reform affects agricultural development and structural change. So I collect comprehensive land coupon transaction data, and I compile those counties that are located close to the province boundaries within 15 kilometers. About the literature, my work is most related to 3 strands of literature. It is closely related to the literature of food security and farmland preservation. So the literature has found that those top-down regulations, such as farmland red land policy and green production project, is inefficient at promoting agricultural development or sustained agro output. And my paper studies market-based land reform. And the second literature is related to the land use policy and urban land quota in China. So Professor Zhang has related work about it. And my paper studies reform that creates actual land quotas. And the third literature is about the rural land property. And there are many papers talking about the land titling and agricultural productivity, or what's the effect of the land titling on the rural entrepreneurship and human capital accumulation. But all these papers care about those farmland, My paper focused on the rural residential land and found it also has a positive effect on local development. So before I start, let me give you a brief information about Chongqing. So this is the map of China, and the red area is Chongqing. Chongqing is one of the municipalities, one of the 4 municipalities in China. The other 3 are Beijing, Shanghai, and Tianjin. And it has it maybe seems to be small showing the map, but actually the area size of Chongqing is similar to Austria, so it is not a small region. And there are 38 counties in Chongqing and more than 1,000 towns. And it has a population more than 32 million people. And in 2023, its GDP reached 3 trillion RMB. So how does the system work? So the land coupon system was implemented in 2008 when 1/3 of rural people in Chongqing migrate to the city, and that will leave abundant rural residential land wasted. And at the same time, the urban land supply is in shortage, constrained by the farmland preservation requirements, especially in its main city areas. So the Chongqing land coupon system invented, and the coupon is created when those farmers reclaim their rural housings into farmland. And one land coupon permits an equal amount of urban land to be developed in other places within Chongqing. So it's actually a virtuous transfer of land use rights across different spaces. And so who are the buyers of those land coupons? That's those firms or individuals who need to develop a part of residential land or commercial land. So for those industry land, there is no need. And after the reform, the urban construction quotas will come from 2 sources. One is allocated by the central government, and the second one is created by those farmers when they reclaim their rural housing. So I visited Chongqing last year, and I talked with officials in the Chongqing Country Land Exchange, and I visited some villages and talked with village officials, and they gave me some first-hand information and their opinions about the reform. And even one official showed me his application of the land coupon and his rural housing certificate, and also how the housing was mapping and serving. So the coupon transaction I summarized into 3 phases. The first one is land coupon generation, is when the farmers reclaim their rural land into farmland, and then after the reclamation, the farmers will get a certificate of this process. And in the second stage, the farmers can trade with those firms through the country land exchange. So the coupon is transferable. And the last stage is the use of the land coupon. So when those firms obtain land coupons from farmers, they can then ask the government, hey, I have already get the land coupons. Now I want to bid for a parcel of the urban land. So after the reform, we can imagine that in places that supply those land coupons, their farmland will be increased. And in regions that are buying those land coupons, their farmland can be developed into urban land. And since those places that supply land coupons are typically where those rural people migrate to other cities, so the pattern of rural population will be consistent with the rural residential land. So this figure verifies my point. The first figure is shows the rural population and the rural residential land in China, and the bottom pattern shows this pattern in Chongqing. So the red line shows the rural population and the red line shows the rural residential land. So in China as a whole, even though the number of rural population decreased, but the amount of rural residential land actually increased. So it's quite inconsistent. But in Chongqing, this pattern are somehow very consistent with each other. That shows maybe the coupon system works for everywhere. And also, I plot the change of farmland with those 4 municipalities, and the red line is Chongqing. So compared to Beijing, Shanghai, and Tianjin, Chongqing actually maintains its farmland quite well. So the data I use in this paper comes from 2 sources. The first one is the land coupon transaction databases. In the database, I have the information about the purchaser's name and how many areas they purchased and their payments. And I also have the farmer's name, part of their ID, and also their compensation value and the location of the reclaimed rural land. And I aggregate the land coupon supply to town or county level. And the second source is the statistic yearbook, where I can get information about the GDPs or and also some input and output in the agriculture sector. So this figure I plot the transaction price of the land coupon. So the red line is the land coupon price, and it's actually quite stable in the recent years at around 300 yuan per square meters. And the red line is the urban residential and commercial land price in Chongqing. So the land coupon price is actually like less than 10% of the urban residential and commercial land price. And this figure shows the accumulated land coupon supply from 2008 to 2023 across 1,029 towns in Chongqing. So here is the center of the Chongqing, well, the main city areas. And we can see that actually it's those places that are further away from the city centers that they have the incentive to do the reform, to reclaim their rural housing. So my empirical stage currently is a simple this is this. So I compare Chongqing, since I don't have statistics at the town level, so I further aggregate the transaction data into the county level, and I use county as a unit of analysis. And I will compare those counties that locate at the boundary of the Chongqing province. So there are 5 provinces close to Chongqing. There are Sichuan, Hunan, Hubei, Guizhou, and Shanxi. And I restrict those samples to be counties that located within 15 kilometers to the province boundaries. And I drop those counties in Chongqing that never supply land coupons. That's mostly the city centers. And the first regressions that I run is I look at how the land coupon supply will affect the local economic development. So I look at the GDP in agriculture, industry, and services, and also the GDP per capita. And it shows that the land coupon, after the land coupon reform, those counties in Chongqing actually experience a larger increase in its GDP in agriculture, industry, and also the GDP per capita. The second regressions that I run is I focus on the structure change. So I measure structure change as the GDP share in different sectors. And it shows that the GDP share in agriculture decreases more in in those counties that supply land coupons after the reform. So it indicates the structural change is faster in those places. And lastly, I look at the agricultural development. So I check how the land coupon supply will affect the grain output and the sown area, and also the agriculture machine power and funds. It all has a positive effect on these variables. So that's basically my paper. So let me conclude. So in this paper, I study market-based land reform, which is called the land coupon reform, and which is effective at preserving farmland and sustaining grain output. And I found that the GDP per capita experience larger in those counties that supply land coupons, and it also promotes structural change. And thank you. And I welcome all the comments and suggestions.
Yeah, can we go back to your tables
Yeah.
of your GDP results?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, like, how could you interpret like the size of the equations? Like, it seems that like the size are too large for me, like 62% of the GDP change, right? So can you provide any explanations or interpretations?
When I see those numbers, I also found it very large, to be honest. I couldn't say why this number is so large.
As you put the mean at the bottom, that's the idea. Also, it's very large, but relative to industry, it's small.
You mean
No, you need to put a mean.
mean?
The mean value of the GDP, industry GDP, total GDP. So that's why it also means the ag GDP increased 62%. When you look at the next, the share actually going down.
No, because agriculture
Small.
agriculture share decrease is a sign of structural change.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we just get a sense, right?
Okay.
So when you have mean, people say, okay, also it's very big, the base is small.
Okay.
But the logarithm is kind of
It's better to try to visualize the effect. So before and after high and low counties, and see how the log GDP series is changing, and see whether we can see the effect.
Okay.
And there might be
So you
something
mean
wrong.
some event study or
No,
just plot the row,
you
plot two lines?
to plot a standard DID graph. So before 2000 and after 2008, and then two types of counties. Counties use a lot of coupon, and counties use, so use a median to divide the counties into two groups. And then see over time whether log GDP in the two groups, they used to be parallel, perhaps one group is a little higher, and then after 2008, one group has to be a lot higher to produce a coefficient.
Sorry, may I ask if you mean I only compare those counties within Chongqing, but not compare Chongqing with others?
Whatever in your center.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So ideally you do this, and you also do the land area. So how many agricultural area could be increased because of conversion from the residential area to agricultural area? And then you will see if the area also increase maybe 50% or 30%, then maybe also it means the yield increase, right? Productivity increase. Because you need to know what's the mechanism, why the agriculture is so much. For the land, I doubt land increase that much. Because it's from residential land to agricultural land increase, but not maybe only 10%. You have done that or not? The area.
The tables, I have the zone area.
The sun area. Sun area.
But this is many years, so it's a cumulative effect. So that could.
Can you use the intensive variation in quotes instead of a dummy? Can you do something about the number?
Intensity?
Yeah.
So use the accumulated land coupon divided by the administrative area, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, continuous variable, exactly.
Because those actually within Chongqing, those counties will be exposed to the reform at the same extent. It's just whether those farmers want to do this or not. So I'm not sure how to construct a continuous variable to show that.
I see. I thought maybe it's about the number of coupons.
Yeah. So I say whether I can use the accumulated coupon divided by the administrative area and then can give you a sense about the intensity. But that's indulgence, like that's well, people they want to do this and they will supply more.
Yeah, so it's less about indigeneity, it's more about whether this coefficient.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You do this, you also do robustness check,
Right.
use the intensity of coupon
Yeah.
issued every year.
Yeah,
Issued every year.
the number.
Okay.
Because the coupon still have to time this time, the 2008.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know whether you can find the ID for that. If you want to get.
Since you're writing a dissertation, there are my ideas for other papers, but I like the policy in a sense, it's both fair, as I said.
Yeah.
We talk about, because it allows people far away from the central city to benefit from this appreciation of land price due to urbanization. So it's a fair policy. The other thing is also efficient because you have this market system, allow the people who value the quota the most to get to use the quota. So I would rather to ask some questions related to these two features of the policy. This is much better than the planners say, okay, this is a quota, and you use the quota. It's very arbitrary, and only people close to the central city will benefit from urbanization. So
Yeah.
this is really good.
Convention is always better.
In fact, your results are quite consistent with results that we got. We published the China Economic Review in 2020, where we looked at 3 different cases of rural residential lands reconstruction. So there are quite some villages in China nowadays where all the houses are demolished and replaced by higher-rise buildings, 3 or 4 floors buildings often. And that saves quite a lot of land. And that land can also be traded then. And in Chengdu, it was also traded through a quota system. We would put bonds, and they got quite similar results. That indeed, though living quite far away, they benefit a lot from it.
Yeah.
It's, but apparently, it's not taking place at the village level in Chongqing. I understand it's only individual farmers who are more part of this coupon system, or is it also to the villages? So that the entire village can all the houses can be replaced, all the empty houses also are being demolished, and people end up living in normally in slightly higher houses. It saves a lot of space, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently they are often really willing to do so.
So the villages, the rural collectives in the villages also benefits because of the policy, because the compensation is allocated like 58% to the farmers and 15% to the rural collectives. So they also, for the rural collective, they have an incentive to encourage those policies because they got money directly.
But simply calculating the return for the rural household to comply the coupon system. So you said the average the average price compensation is 300 yuan per square meter.
Yeah.
But yeah, we simply calculated the return. Maybe it's only the return is only about 50,000 or 60,000 in total. But this is compared with the urban housing price, it's a very small amount of compensation. I'm wondering whether the rural households they are willing to participate or they want their participation preference for this kind of reform. Of course, it's a fair reform, very nice policy innovation, but yeah, through the survey last year we conducted with the migrants in Xinjiang municipality, we also investigate the rural homestead exit system. So even though we gave a housing compensation in the neighboring town or in the cities, a lot of migrants they say they want to keep their homestead or the housing because this is a social norm because they have a root in the rural area. After they rent out or they sell their homesteads, like they lost the connection with the rural village, with their hometown.
Yeah,
So
that's true, but rural population is declining a lot.
Yeah.
Not just due to migration, but also people die. So you will have a lot of vacant houses sitting there. It's not like they went to the city and they will come back. Nobody's living there. I grew up in so I see a lot of them.
yeah.
It also depends which area. Chengdu is similar, right?
Yeah.
But because of earthquake, it's easier to implement. Some places they simply they build a high-rise building. Everybody living in this high-rise building. I visit some of them. Some of the old people are not happy because they're not farmers anymore. Like high building, they couldn't put their scissors, how to say it, like the tools you use a high-rise place. So some complain about that too. Yeah, no, I think the distribution will be very important. How much really benefits these people?
Yeah.
Directly involved.
So I have a table that showing that the data is from the 2021 compensation for the land coupon sales. So on average, the area of reclaimed land is at around 300 square kilometers, and the farmers will be compensated at around 63,000 RMB. So it's not a small amount of money for them. And you talk about the coupon price is much lower compared to the urban land price. That's true because those coupons are created in those remote rural areas and the land is actually in the city center. So there is different demand for those two types of land. So the price is different.
Yeah, I can imagine the opportunity for the rural residents who moved out because not every migrant, they have the housing, they have their home. Not everyone is the homeowner. But for the urban renters, they do not have the living place, their own living place. So maybe this kind of group of people, they are not willing to participate in this reform. Right?
Yeah, so they are voluntary to participate. It's your choice. If you want to convert, then you can convert. It's just give you another choice.
For future work, I have a feeling that some town level analysis will be interesting.
Yeah.
Either use satellite
I'm
image data.
collecting that.
Yeah.
That's why I plot this figure because they're working bridge very.
There are a lot of interesting questions. Which towns tend to participate, which and also you have price variation. So some town level analysis will be good.
Yeah, you saw the boundary discontinuity.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the suggestions and comments. Great.
Maybe
Oh, you know. Converters and I speak common.
Yes.
No. Yeah.
So then